Today we're talking about the Viltrox 20mm T2.0 cinema-style lens with the Leica L mount for the Panasonic LUMIX S-series cameras. This is the normal wide shot you've all seen a bunch of times. That is the Nocticron lens, 42.5mm on the GH5, so about an 85mm full frame equivalent. This, however, is the 20mm full frame lens right in front of me. Up close and personal, getting about the same field of view behind me, but of course I am a lot closer. But if I put that 20mm all the way back where the GH5 normally sits, well, that is a pretty wide field of view. All right, let's get back to normal. So first of all, what is this lens? As a cine lens, what does that actually mean? Well, it means quite a few things. Let's take a look at the lens here. You'll see, first of all, that it is geared for a follow focus system, meaning that it has, instead of a standard knurled knob that you would grab onto, it has these gears that are designed to mesh with a remote control follow focus system. Now, that doesn't mean you can't focus it by hand, but it does mean that if you're gripping it too hard, you are actually going to feel that on your fingers, and that may not feel too good after a while. So you can certainly manual focus with this by hand, but it really is designed to be used with a follow focus system. The fact that it is a T2.0 lens is very important. Notice that it is T2.0, not F2.0. What's the difference? Well, the F number is a fraction. F is for focal length, and it's F slash a number, so F over 2.0. That's not a coincidence that that's a slash in there, it's actually a fraction. The F number is a measurement of the focal length and the aperture in that particular lens. It is not necessarily a measure of how much light is coming through. So if you have two different lenses that are both f2.8, the amount of light coming through may not actually be identical. You may find that on different lenses, especially from different manufacturers, that the amount of light, therefore the exposure, coming through a lens at f2.8 might not be exactly the same between lenses. So if you set your camera to a 60th of a second at f2.8 with one lens, and then you put a different one on at f2.8, the image might actually be a little bit brighter or darker. A T-stop is a measurement that is done by actually measuring the amount of light coming through the lens, the amount of light transmitting to the sensor, T for transmission. It is a transmission measurement. So when you have a T2.0 measurement, that T2.0 should be identical to any other lens with a T2.0 on it as well. Now, while there may be inconsistencies between manufacturers, they're going to be slight, but certainly if you're buying a series of lenses from the same manufacturer, you can rely on a T2.0 measurement on one lens being identical to that on the others in the set. So again, looking at the ring here, you see that you have T from 2 all the way down to 16. You also may notice that this is not clicked. There's no clicks or stops between the aperture settings. So you have a smooth declicked or clickless aperture ring, which means that you can change your aperture smoothly while shooting, and it also means that you have an infinite number of settings between any two given apertures. So really, when you look at this closely, you'll see as I open and close the aperture ring that it is totally smooth inside. Further down the barrel, you'll of course find the focus marks in both meters and feet. Curiously, if you look at the company website, it calls this a depth of field mark. These aren't depth of field marks. These are just focus marks. In fact, let me show you what depth of field marks look like. These are depth of field marks. This lens has them. See the numbers 16, 8, 4, the other side of the red mark, 4, 8, 16. What this tells you is that if you set the aperture to f16, you look at the two numbers 16 out here on the guide, and then inside of that window we see the focal distance. You can see that anything between 2¼ feet to 3 feet should be in focus at f16 at this particular setting. And in case you're wondering, no, these numbers on the lens do not glow in the dark like they did on that Sigma Cine lens that I looked at last year. If you didn't see that video, definitely check it out. It was kind of cool to see those really high-end Cine lenses in use. Anyway, back to this lens here. You'll notice that the lens shade on here is what's called a lotus style, and it is removable. And if you take it off, then the lens is exposed, so you definitely want to be careful with this. But if you wanted to put a filter on your lens, you really can't with this. And it doesn't have drop-in filters. So instead, what it does is it comes with a special lens shade that is designed to accommodate an 82mm filter. The gearing on this works great with the Ronin SC and its own follow focus system. And the combination of this lens with the LUMIX S5 and the focus mechanism is about 1,800 grams. So it's just 200 grams shy of the 2 kilo limit on the SC. This does mean that you have to be really careful with balancing. I found that when I first set this up, my balance wasn't perfect, and the SC did error out and lock up on me several times. But once I got the balance right, it was fine. If you want to see if this is going to work with your gimbal and your camera setup, the lens specs say it weighs, I think, 808 grams, but when I weighed it, it actually weighs a bit less. It came in around 770. So you can do the math to determine if this lens with your LUMIX body will work on your gimbal. The follow focus system also works great with the Tilta Nano. Here's a shot of it rigged up on a LUMIX S1H, and it works perfectly there as well. And here's the manufacturer's specifications of this lens. If you want to read these, just pause the video now. So how wide is 20mm? Well, if you're familiar with the 24 to 105 lens that came with many of your S-series cameras, here's a comparison of 20mm and 24mm. Here's a scene shot at 24mm. That's the widest focal length on the 24 to 105, and the same scene again at 20mm on the Viltrox lens. Now, if you don't think that you need anything quite that wide at 20mm, let me remind you that if you're shooting in 4K 60, then you are actually cropping into either an APS-C crop or a Super 35 crop, depending on the camera you're using. Now, both of those are about a 1.5x crop ratio. So that 24mm lens that you already have is actually going to become a 36mm, whereas this 20mm becomes 30mm. So there is a bit of a difference there. Here's a few shots to compare. Here's the 20mm lens at full frame, and that same lens now shot at APS-C at 4K 60. Now here's the same scene again at 24mm, and the same scene again at APS-C, so equivalent of 36mm. Of course, what matters most at the end of the day, though, is how good the lens looks. So I took the Viltrox 20mm T2.0 lens with the LUMIX S5 on the Ronin SC gimbal out for a bit of a joyride in our local park to catch some of the fall colors. Here's some of those shots. Some of these shots are 4K 30, so full frame, while others are 4K 60, so an APS-C crop. I've labeled them all on the shots. Notice here the lack of distortion at the edges. As I do this pan across these vertical lines, you'll see that there is almost no distortion at all, which I think is pretty impressive. Here's what the flare on this lens looks like, with the sun coming straight into the lens. And just a handful of beauty shots. Enjoy. Finally, here's a shot of the X-Rite color checker, shot with both the Viltrox lens and a native Panasonic lens, the 20-60 in this case. I did this to compare the color rendition between the two lenses, and I gotta say, I'm surprised. I did expect that the Viltrox would look quite a bit more different than this does. I'd say these are virtually identical and easily correctable in post. So overall, what do I think? I like it. This lens at 20mm T2.0 is nice and bright. It's sharp, minimal distortion along the edges, which I have to admit kind of surprised me. I figured at this $500 price point, we'd see a little bit more blurring, a little bit more distortion at the edges, but this is really clean. It feels good. The build quality feels really good in the hand. The gearing works very well. It's very smooth. I honestly thought, because it's quite stiff to the touch, that my follow focus system might not be able to handle it, but it did just fine. So I'm very happy with it overall. I'd call it a good buy. I'd call it a recommend. If you are looking for something really wide, and again, even if you don't need 20mm, but you're shooting 4K 60, so you're punching in a little bit, I think it's a great lens to add to your arsenal. If you do decide to buy one of these, there's affiliate links down below. This is not a sponsored video, but again, this was sent to me for this review. And if you do decide to purchase, I'd appreciate using those links. If you haven't yet subscribed, be sure you do that. And there's that like button down there somewhere. I think you know what to do with that. Take care. We'll see you next time. Bye-bye.